kind of like what's scrolling on the bottom of the screen. We have our office hours. Our next one is going to be Tuesday, September 10th at 10 a.m. We offer free advice. If you are looking for anything, please reach out, ask, come, and we would be more than happy to sit down and talk about anything from mental health to, well, I guess any business advice at all. So it really doesn't matter what you're doing. We're there, we're here to help, we're here to give back. And that's something that's, very important in our community. One of the things that I am excited about, and when I met Madeline, probably about 6 or 8 months ago, we just had a great conversation, and I am so excited about this. So Madeline, the founder of Salient, I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been so excited about this.
It's always, I say this so often. I mean, we probably should have had this conversation 4 years ago.
Exactly. Right at the beginning of YouTube Lives.
Exactly. And when you get these conversations going, especially we're both, I mean, you're delved into the behavioral science and the mental health industry a heck of a lot more than I am. And I just love of what you are doing, and I love what you're doing. We'll get into some of the things down the road here, but I want to know. I want to know about your why, your passion about this industry. How did you find it, and how did you get into it?
Sure. Yeah. So I sort of stumbled into behavioral science through the back door. So I was in finance, and I was like pretty mainstream, like straight and narrow in the finance industry. I'm from Calgary, and so energy, commodities and trading, and collateral management and risk management, that was what I was doing when I discovered behavioral finance. So through doing my CFA charter, I discovered that there's this crossover between finance and psychology, which is something that I had a degree in, and I had always had a passing interest in just from personal perspective, and sort of saw these two worlds collide together in a way that I was curious about, fascinated about, and decided to go and do my master's in to basically learn more. So I stumbled into it. It was a very exciting sort of, to me, a new industry. To me, it's still sort of in this whoosh of adoption and adapting to different industries, different fields, and really gaining further and faster traction as we've kind of moved along. So that was sort of how I stumbled into it. My why is really curiosity about human behavior and how we can help people make better decisions in the real world. So kind of translating out of academic study, using those insights, but using them in a really proactive and productive way.
So I guess when you say stumbled into it, I mean, I've heard people talk about that before and do that. I mean, it has to be, when you stumble into it, like, was it like, oh this is my calling, this is what I have to do? Like, do you envision your trajectory to go the way it did, or was it something that you end up going, oh wow, well this is different, I can take my career this way, or I can do it that way? Like, was where you are now where you thought you would be?
No. Where I am is definitely not where I thought I would end up professionally necessarily. It was sort of this, oh, this is a collision of like things that I really care about. Where can I investigate this further? But then as you kind of go along, it sort of iterates upon itself. And so realizing that the applications for decision and behavioral science is far broader than just the finance industry and why people make the financial decisions they do. That's a fundamental part of people's lives that really requires a lot of intention and attention, but also health behaviors, mental health, the way that we kind of navigate our world, our relationships, the ways that organizations internally and externally, operate. All of those things are driven by human behavior and human decision making and psychology underneath all of that. And a lot of that is unconscious. And so for me, the sort of broadening of my horizon beyond just financial decision making into all of these other realms of decision making has been profoundly rewarding, just because it all captures my own personal interest. And so being somewhat of a behavioral science generalist really works for me, because I find I'm curious about a lot of different things, and it allows me to see the overlap and the commonalities between different fields that you might not necessarily think have have underlying psychology in common.
Well, let's talk a little. Let's dive into a little bit more about the behavioral science because our first conversation. Obviously, we're both very passionate about mental health, especially with entrepreneurs. You do a lot of other things. We'll talk about, but how does behavioral science really fit into the mental health conversation?
Yeah, so this is something that I've only more recently been getting more seriously into. It's always been these kind of two worlds that I care deeply about. So my professional life has been behavioral science for some years now. My personal life has been very much focused on mental health, including my own, which I'm sure that we'll get into as well. But only recently have I sort of been figuring out how do we bring those two worlds together. And for example, there's a project that I'm working on that has to do with language and stigma and mental health. So, how does the language we use around mental health perpetuate stigma in certain communities, certain countries, within certain groups of marginalized individuals? And then how can we produce better language or better ways of phrasing the way that we talk about mental health, or even just the social norms that we have around sharing about our mental health? How can we investigate that in a qualitative and quantitative way through research, to have much better outcomes and have people seeking services for their mental health? Because you have a supply side, which is people being able to access services. So the services have to exist. The supply has to exist for people to be able to seek help. But you also have the demand side. So if people feel shame and like they don't want to speak up or be honest or seek help or ask for help, which I'm sure we've all struggled with in some way or another, so we can all kind of relate to this. But if it's really severe, especially within certain countries and communities, it can prevent people from seeking out those mental health services that may already exist. And so when we think from a behavioral science perspective, okay, well, we've set up the system, the context is there to catch, let's say, people that are struggling with their mental health. Why aren't they accessing these services? We know that they're out there. Why aren't they accessing it? So it's about figuring out what the underlying barriers to that access is. And in a lot of cases, it still has to do with stigma.
Well, isn't that the truth? I mean, I'm probably trying to get over that stigma is a probably a 3-hour conversation. I mean, it's right. I always say asking for help is not a sign of weakness, right? And I mean, that's something that we see. And anytime, moving forward, when we're working with entrepreneurs in the mental health, we see that. But when you put them into a room with each other, they're very willing to open up and be vulnerable because they know everybody in that room is probably struggling with the same things that they are struggling with.
Yeah. It's incredibly multifaceted where stigma comes from. Language is only one piece of it, right? There are tons of social norms about strength versus weakness and all the ways that we talk about ourselves and others, or oh, it's not that bad, or other people have it worse, or oh, it would impact my career or something like this if I were to be public about the way that I'm struggling. So I think entrepreneurs probably struggle with that as well. But as you say, the context really matters. So when people are in an environment that facilitates that sharing, that they're feeling very safe within, when other people step up first, and of course, you always have to have a sort of patient zero or like a first mover to say, look, this is what I'm going through. That makes other people brave. And that's why I'm as public with my own, story as I am, because I think that that matters. And if not me, who kind of a thing.
Well, and I really do think that's important. I mean, I've been very vulnerable about myself and our situation as a family and things along those lines because I think it is important for people that, especially in our world, that everybody just makes their lives look perfect and everybody thinks that your life is perfect. That it's probably behind the scenes it's not,
Mhm.
and being out there and being talking about it, and being that kind of role model and leading the charge along with a lot of other people that talk about it, I think is very important.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a few benefits to it, right? And I see this in a few different ways. So the first is that you being honest with yourself is often the first step in sort of helping yourself get out of the situation or the struggle that you're going through. You have to get really, really honest with yourself. And then you can be honest with others, which essentially allows everybody to unleash the love that they have for you in support of you, that was always there, but you have to invite people in to be able to support you in that way. So when I was really struggling, me kind of coming out with my eating disorder at the time, it was like everybody knew. It wasn't this secret that I thought it was, but as soon as I was open and public about it, I got this wave of support. And it's like people are just waiting there in the wings to support you more than you could ever imagine. And calling in those resources is often the first step to you actually being able to heal.
Isn't that the truth, right? Like it's and then, oh, I don't even know. I mean, maybe it's that mental again, just block that you just think that you're going to be viewed as a failure, viewed as I don't know, be less of a person. I don't know, where to go with that, but I mean, I felt actual guilt when I was actually listening people, helping people, and I wasn't looking after my own issues.
Mm, which
It,
is,
it,
I
it
think, pretty
felt it.
common.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Like, and again, it made it a lot more easier for me to move forward, and I felt better, when people understood that I was going through the exact same things that they were, not just reaching out to me because they thought it was somebody safe to talk to, right?
Yes, yes, which is such a big part of it. And I think the other benefit is it's a little bit sort of behavioral sciencey, which, we have sort of these underlying psychological processes and things that we can do to change our behavior more quickly. And something about being public about your struggles also kind of gives you an element of self accountability in some way. So the reason that I think this matters is that, in my view, there are sort of these two camps in the self-help world. And this is sort of tangential to behavioral science because behavioral science in some ways baked into all of this stuff. But one camp is very therapeutic, very past facing, very reflective, very processing. And that's really important to understand the underlying reasons why you've come to the place in your life that you are. Why are you struggling? What kind of, I don't want to say went wrong, but what could have happened to have gotten you to sort of the place that you're in? So that's one camp. And often it's kind of bubble wrapped and it's a bit softer and more compassionate. And I think that that's very important. But it also has a tendency to keep people ruminating and stuck on the problem. The other camp is very driven, very behavior first, very grinded out, very grit driven. Very, for lack of a better word, David Gogginsy is kind of what I call it. And
Yeah.
it's sort of like just grind it out until you feel better. And I think there's value in that as well, to sort of to really tap into how can I move myself out of the rut that I'm in by quickly and efficiently changing my state physically and therefore changing my behavior. So there's value in that as well, but it also kind of takes out this emotional part that I think is really important. So both of them have some value, both of them have some gaps, and I really believe that this middle ground in between is where we need to sort of channel the way that we think about mental health or development or getting through difficult times for anybody, no matter what their kind of big thing is. I think this middle ground is important. And so by being public with your story, it sort of encourages you to actually get going and to change your behavior, because no matter how much, therapy and self-reflection you do, if you don't actually change anything about the way that you're living or the things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, nothing will actually change for you. So I really strongly believe that like both of these things have to be integrated for us to be thriving the way that we really deserve to.
Oh, I think that could be the greatest point ever made on this show. I truly believe, right? It is something that even myself, I never believed in psychologists. I never believed in it. I always thought it was fluff. I just didn't. And until I started to really, go be vulnerable, open up, I saw the benefit. And it's not for everybody, right? I mean, there might be alternative methods that some people where it worked better for my wife, and when we're going through, her state, but everybody has to find what works for them, and I mean that worked for me. It really, really helped me, and again, it helped me. When I said it out loud for the first time behind a mic in front of, probably 600 or 700 people, like I was scared shitless. right? I was like, oh my God, like this is gonna, is it gonna be embarrassing? Are people gonna say I'm never gonna talk to him again? But it went to exactly what you said. It was just like the support was just overwhelming.
Yeah, it's a really powerful thing, and a lot of the hesitancy to share comes from storytelling and storytelling that we're doing ourselves. So all of these things that we feel, whether it's guilt, whether it's shame, they start with a thought and they end up being a thread of a story of what ifs and scenarios playing out. And while it's important to sort of play out scenarios in our mind so that we can kind of cope ahead with what might come, we can really get trapped in stories and narratives about, well, maybe it's not bad enough, maybe I shouldn't share it, maybe if I go public with this, people will think that I'm not as good at my job as I should be, and therefore they won't want to hire me anymore. So I hesitated a lot before sharing my story on LinkedIn, for example, a few years ago. And there was just some lingering story in me that if I share this on a professional platform, that people will see me as less competent. And if you're, let's say, younger or earlier in your career, or for, if you think that, women have a harder time getting to certain places. And so you're telling yourself these other stories about why it's already hard for you. And then you layer on top of this other struggle you have. You're like, people are going to think that I don't know what I'm doing, or that I'm like too unstable to be able to do the work that I do. But in fact, I would say that people who are struggling behind the scenes and still showing up and succeeding the way that we see them do so often, imagine what they can do when they're well, if this is how well they're doing when they're not doing so well.
Oh wow, great! What a great comment. I mean, it is so true. Uh, and I know, I mean, you live this. You're in the kind of the trenches day to day. And behavioral science, obviously, before I go into this, I'm talking with
Yeah.
Madeline Quinlan, the founder of Salient. If you want to learn more information about her company, just click on "This is Salient" in the comments section. It'll take you directly to her website. When you work around the world with this, you work with UNICEF, and I mean, you see this on different aspects, of every corner of the world. Are there anything different that you can say that, in Asia, or you're going to be in Kazakhstan here, or you're in London right now, and you obviously work in North America? What are the differences, or what are some of the things that, certain people do in certain cultures or certain areas of the world that might benefit each other?
It's that is such a good question, and it's such a broad question. And I can only speak from, obviously the experience and the exposure to certain areas of work and regions that I've had access to. What I would say as the sort of bottom line is that there is far more that we all have in common in our underlying psychology and our behavior than we would expect. Way more similarities than differences. Everybody has very similar stories. Everybody believes a lot of the same things about how people can thrive, and how we ought to get there is a different story. So the methods through which we change behavior, or the methods through which we decide to get people well that are struggling, those things are still quite different across different regions. But ultimately, I think that we can all agree like how important it is, first of all. So that's one thing. The research itself is lacking in some regions more than others. And the adoption of behavioral science, for example, is lacking in some regions more than others. So I would say, as an example, the UK has a very, very strong awareness of the use and the purpose of behavioral science in organizations, in our day-to-day lives, in policy making, et cetera. They are sort of one of the first movers in integrating some of these insights. And so in contrast, even something like in Canada and, in Calgary or things like that, there's a bit more awareness building that I do as a consultant in this field to build the capacity as like a behavioral science 101. So when I go into companies, I'm often doing a session on behavioral science 101 to even facilitate the conversation of what is it that we do and what are we doing here and how is this going to help. So that's one example, is sort of the, even at the baseline, the awareness of the particular practice is different. And then you have, different parts of Asia and sort of the East that you could say that is using it less even than we are in North America, for sure.
So that is interesting, because of all the, until we met, I've never ever heard anybody talk about the behavioral science, included with mental health, and the why of it, and that's why I found our conversation so fascinating, and that's why I was so looking forward to this conversation. And when you say you're going in there and talking about the behavioral science of kind of a 101, what are you telling people?
Yeah, so we kind of, when I do these capacity building sessions, I sort of start from the ground level, which is like, where does behavioral science come from? This idea that we have two systems of thinking in our brain. One is very fast, one is very automatic, autopilot. It's full of shortcuts, which we really need because we have a limited cognitive capacity. All of us do. But it makes a lot of errors as a result because we're on autopilot. System two is what we call it, and that's more slow, deliberate, calculated. We can weigh up pros and cons more effectively, but it takes a lot more cognitive effort and it takes a lot more time. So it's about knowing when do we dip into system two to make these important decisions, and how do we build habits to such an extent that we can sort of automate our system one in a productive manner. So kind of starting from that as the baseline, and then thinking about, okay, well, what biases do we see in the world that are a result of these mental shortcuts that we're taking? How can we identify those? How can we measure those? How are those impacting the decisions we're making, either in organizations, in our personal lives? And then how can we create interventions or contexts of our environment that facilitate easier, better, more seamless, and high quality decision making? So that's sort of the idea behind Behavioral Science 101. And it takes us through a process which Salient uses, which we call the 5Ds. Which brings basically a full circle. How do we figure out what we need to do? How do we do it? And then how do we measure the success of those interventions?
How do companies react to this? Are they, I mean, I guess if they're calling you in, there is something, that they're interested in, and they want to help. Do you see that, companies get behind it and really support it? Or I guess this is gonna sound awful, but do they just kind of want to, oh, hey, we're doing this and we're saying we're just helping our employees, and let's go.
It's a little bit of both, and it depends on the
Okay.
company, right? And
Yeah.
so, as you know, one of the benefits of entrepreneurship and being self-employed is that in some way you do kind of get to pick your clients. And so you have the opportunity to say, okay, well, if this person or this individual within a company or this organization is really not interested in actually figuring out the true answer, then maybe that's not the client for you, right? They're not
Yeah.
going to be interested. You're going to be fighting them the whole way. But if you can get in and say, look, we might actually be just asking the wrong question. We might be measuring the wrong success factors. We might need to get a little bit deeper and get a little more personal and ask some better questions, because what we know from behavioral science, especially, is that what people say and how they behave are extremely, extremely different. We have this thing called the intention action gap, where people will say until they're blue in the face, well, this is a good decision and this is what I would want to do. And they continue to not do it. And so then we have to interrogate, okay, well, why is that happening? And why is the words not matching the actions? And so it's only through kind of intelligent design of ways of collecting data that we can get at those truer answers. So you will find that certain clients are really excited about this. And I find that startups, especially entrepreneurs, are great clients for behavioral scientists because they're curious, they're bold, they want to do things the right way and get at the right answer. They're also more agile, and they're able to make quicker decisions because often it's a flatter, smaller team that then you can actually get stuff done. So something that larger organizations or larger global organizations struggle with is it's hard to make change quickly. So it's something that I love about working with entrepreneurs and startups, especially, is that they're the ideal client.
And they are, right? And and the one thing about entrepreneurs is that a lot of times they're on an island by themselves, right? Like they are smaller. They are, they get wrapped up and they forget to look after themselves. For the ones that do look after it, and whether it be through you or great companies like that, like Sarah and Kira Collectively Tangle, that are helping them and bringing these conversations to the front and making sure that what I say all the time, a company is only as healthy as its founder. I mean, if you're not healthy at the top, you're nothing is going to be healthy below you, and looking after that is so important for not only success of your company but the growth.
Oh, I mean, I couldn't have said it better than you just did, but all of the success and growth in your company means absolutely nothing if you're not well. Absolutely nothing. And when you realize that, you create this pause within yourself to say, okay, how good are my basics? Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually? How are my relationships in my own life?
Yeah.
And are those things being sacrificed by the drive and endeavor to be successful within one facet, which is, let's say, for example, my business or my career? The minute that you are struggling with something mentally, physically, emotionally, you could care less how well your company is doing. If you're really struggling, none of it matters. So to me, what I would say to any entrepreneur is it absolutely has to start with you and your own wellness, because none of it matters otherwise, and it will all potentially fall apart if you don't take care of that first. So for me, within the span of a few months of my like darkest time of my eating disorder, my personal relationship was falling apart, my business partnership was falling apart, I had lost my biggest client at the time, and my eating disorder was the worst that it's ever been. So those things are all related, and it was only through deciding, oh, I need to heal my eating disorder before anything else will come together. All of these things that I want, all of the success and the love and the life, it's only on the other side of this thing that I absolutely have to now stare in the face and take care of.
No, and one of the things, it's hard to say this out loud, right? It's hard to say these things in front of people on private. It's easy to talk one-on-one behind the scenes with a psychologist, but it's very, very difficult to say it in public. And that's something that it took me almost 40 years to say it out loud, right? And even say it to my wife or anybody at all. Like it was very, very difficult. And I agree with that. And I think that's great. And again, we're talking with Madeline here, the founder of This is Salient. Click on her website. It's in the comments section. So as we evolve as a community, and talk and focus on, I kind of think that it's gotten left in the background a little bit again, right? Coming out of COVID, people were focusing on their employees, on the mental health, on how everybody's doing, and this is my personal opinion. I think it's kind of sliding back again.
Mm.
What do you think? For you, what's next to help people, with through behavioral science to move forward with Salient?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a nascent sort of crossover of fields, which is why I'm so excited about it, because it's two of the things that I care about most in the world. I think asking, like I said before, better questions about what's actually going on. I think really understanding the practical implications for an organization of having a workforce that is struggling and unwell, but being very, very practical and intelligent about what needs to be done to help people. So just saying therapy for everyone is actually probably not going to work, because as you said, therapy is not appropriate for everyone, for every context. And something that I've changed my mind about lately is that I don't necessarily think that everybody needs therapy. I used to think everybody could do well to have a therapist. And if you believe that a therapist and talking to somebody individually would do you good, I always encourage people to seek out those services. But it doesn't mean that a catch-all, one-size-fits-all solution is going to be the best way forward. So to me, the next sort of era of behavioral science is individual design. So focusing on what an individual's own heuristics, biases, and needs are, and then how do we change the context and decision-making environment for individuals instead of broad swaths of of the population. So that's what I would come into any organization and advocate for, is how do we gather better information from the people that matter, which is your employees in the context of an organization? And then how do we create solutions that are individualized and show them that they are the ones that actually matter?
And that's so true, right? Like there is no one size fits all, right? And I've really, come to believe that, right? Especially when we are working with entrepreneurs, even, little baby steps, talking them to take, me time, looking after themselves, like don't eat your desk, get out, put your headphones on, put your phone on airplane mode, just go for a walk, listen to tunes, just during the day. I have it. I want to go play squash. I'll go to the gym. That's my time to kind of get away and clear my head, to make sure that I am looking after myself. And, it starts with, you don't have to jump in and go see a psychologist or go see somebody right away, just
Yeah.
little things of getting out there, and maybe it's just going to a networking event, or maybe it's going to Founders Coffee and just meeting other people that will get you out there talking and realizing, hey man, I am not alone.
I'm so glad that you said it the way that you said it, because in a lot of cases, our basics, so like our nutrition, our exercise, our sleep, our stress, those things are often way out of whack, and then we wonder why we feel depressed, anxious, etc., right? So if you haven't even interrogated kind of your basics, it's worth doing, and doing those things like taking breaks and doing the things that work for you, and sort of also adopting a little bit of flexibility into your psyche as an entrepreneur. I find that really driven, self-employed people and entrepreneurs tend to also have perfectionistic traits, and I'm one of these people, so I'm gonna own that. But this idea that, like, without the perfect, Andrew Huberman approved morning routine, and doing all of my like sun exposure and cold exposure and eating the exact macro balanced and all of my supplements, like, you can actually end up doing yourself more harm by the stress of trying to perfect your life than actually just doing a little bit of nudging at the edges to get those benefits, without having to do, a 10,000 step morning routine. Like, there are small wins and little
Yeah.
habits that you can build in gradually, and then it just becomes like breathing. It really does.
Oh, I couldn't, right? And it's kind of each to their own. And what works for you might not work for me. And it took me a long almost a long time to kind of realize that, right? And that note, even in our situation, even with Kath, it was that moment to say, you know what, you've never believed in this. Like, why are we trying to pigeonhole you into something that society says is right? Whereas that's nothing that you've believed your entire life.
Yeah.
And with drugs or anything along those lines, or pills, right? Like, it wasn't there, and I think it was making it worse. And then as soon as we went that way, boom,
Yeah.
it was enlightening. I mean, I've loved this conversation. I mean, we could probably talk for another 4 hours. Like, it is.
Yeah, indeed.
Oh, I mean, we're probably going to have you on again.
And you'll have to come on Uncover. You'll have to come on my podcast. So we'll just go
Oh,
back and forth from
absolutely.
podcast to podcast until we've,
One,
exhausted all of this.
you just let me know when, and I am there. Again, I'm always sad when these conversations are coming to the end, because they're so enlightening. They're so, I think they're so helpful for people. And again, for anybody that wants more information, just click on the Salient website in the comments section. And I know I have my last question, and I'm kind of going to put a little twist on it for you. And just because, I mean, this is kind of a different topic. So, Madeline, if you had one piece of advice for an entrepreneur to take that first step to help themselves and help them become better, mentally, what would that be?
Tell yourself the truth first. Tell yourself the truth, because you know it. You know you better than anybody else knows you, and you're always going to. So, on some level, intuitively, you know, and that should be the place that you kind of step from, to say, okay, now I know what I'll be asking for when I'm asking for help, because I know where I'm sitting currently.
that is unbelievable. Again, I've asked that question 350-ish times, and I don't think I've ever had that answer. Like, but it is so true, right? You sometimes you lead yourself into believing something that just isn't true or isn't there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, I
And you
love
can
that.
do it for as long as you want to. That's the thing, is that you have all the power. You have all the power to make that change, to make that decision. It's all with you. So it's a choice of how long we, and this is something, because I've done it, because I've told myself stories for years and years and years. And then eventually I told myself the truth. And it was very, very hard, but it was the only way that I got to be, where we are now.
No, yeah, the truth is never easy, right? That's for sure. Again,
Yeah.
Madeline, thank you. I want to thank you so much for coming on. And if anybody out there listening, now live, or if you're watching this after the fact and you do need some help, please reach out. I mean, there's someone there that will listen to go for coffee. There's always somebody there. If you coming to our Osler office hours and just sitting down, if you just want to talk to, whether it be Mo, myself, Kyle, Peter, Michael Grant, there's so many people in our community that will, take that first step and reach out, because it is the hardest. And I've really enjoyed this conversation, Madeline. Thank you so much for coming on. If anybody wants more information, go to the website in the comments section and find more about Salient. Again, Madeline, thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your time in London. And, I look forward to having another coffee with you here back in Calgary.
Oh, you absolutely will. Thank you so much for having me, Jade.
Excellent. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your Wednesday, and we will chat soon.